Good morning, men. We are about to begin our second workshop. Today, I hope you have been blessed and encouraged as much as I have, hearing from our speakers and workshop leaders. This session is entitled Leading so that our children can follow. And boy, we certainly heard, and I'm sure, like you, I am convinced that leading, being a presence for our children, is what the world needs, and God is there wanting us to do the same and wanting to do the same in us. So before we introduce and turn things over to our speaker, we'll do this, have the same format. Our speaker will speak for approximately 20 minutes. There will be a question and answer period at the end. Feel free to post your questions in the question and answer session. And if there are no other items, you will be free to listen to a wrap-up message from Bryce. If, however, you want to be in further contact with either of the ministry partners or have questions for our speakers, please use the feedback information provided, or as well, you can reach out to folks at manupcharlotte.org. All right? So without further ado, our speaker this morning for this session is Pastor Farrell Lemings. He has been a pastor for a number of years, and his gift is leadership. And his life and ministry are marked by having a compelling vision for life, a dialed-in focus, and seemingly perpetual motion and endless energy. That's fantastic and needed. Farrell states that embracing the responsibility that comes with leadership is a driving force. And as a result, God has called him to be a servant leader to others. And that is such a needed personal trait. And we look forward to hearing from you. Take it away, Farrell. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks to all the men joining us for this workshop, being a part of Man Up as we talk today about leading so our children can follow. My hope is that in this session, though we're virtual, not live, that there's going to be a bit of iron sharpening iron that enables us to lead better and to lead in a more effective way in our home. If I were sitting with you today and I were able to ask you this question, like what's most important in your life, like if you were to list maybe the 4 or 5 things that you would say, man, this is critical in my life, what I know is that somewhere close to the top of that list is going to be leading well in the home, influencing your children in such a way that they would become followers of Jesus Christ and that they would be set up for success in their life. Like there's not a dad present in this workshop today who would say, hey, I just want my kids to fail. No, you want your kids to succeed just as I want my kids to succeed. So I think as a dad, you have a huge role to play in setting them up for the great future that you want them to experience. They're not going to come to that simply by discovering it on their own. I believe that God has placed them under your covering and in your life so that you can make a deposit in their lives, setting them up for a great future. If we're going to succeed in this area, it requires intentionality. It requires a plan, and it requires, obviously, ongoing investment. It would be like if you were to say today, hey, I want to get into physical shape. Maybe you're out of shape, and you say, hey, I want to get into shape, which I would certainly applaud. What I know is that's not going to happen by you sitting in the recliner eating Krispy Kreme donuts. For you to get into physical shape, it's going to require some investment in your life and on your part. It's going to require intentionality. It's going to require a plan. It's going to require possibly a trainer, someone to come alongside you, to coach you. It's going to take an investment of time and energy. And as I was thinking about that, I thought, it's the same as it relates to us leading in our homes, leading for our children, it's not going to just happen. So it's going to require you to step up and be intentional in your leadership. And I would say this: influence that shapes direction requires intentionality and investment. We say it again: influence that shapes direction, because that's what you want to do as a dad. You want to shape the direction of the life of your child or children. It requires intentionality and it requires investment. So as we think of influence, who was the main male role model that influenced your life, that shaped your life, that shaped who you are today? Who was it that led in such a way that it shaped like how you're processing life? Why don't you take just a minute so we can have some interaction here and just type in the name of that individual in the chat line. And while you're typing that in, let me tell you about the two men that shaped my life. It's my father and my grandfather. I grew up in Arkansas on a farm, and that meant that we worked every day together from sunup literally to sundown. That was kind of the life on the farm. And there were values that I caught simply as I watched my grandfather and my father. It wasn't really so much about what they said, but it's about who they were and how they lived. These are some of the values that I picked up: the value of the church community, the value of reading my Bible daily, the value that real men can worship Jesus passionately, the significance of being responsible and a man of integrity, the value of relationships and the value of people, and that it's honorable to work hard. All of that I learned simply by the influence of my grandfather and my father, as they shaped my life simply by how they led and as I watched that. So you think of that male role model when you put in the chat line who influenced your life, what would you say is the most valuable contribution they made in your life? Think about that for a minute. They made a contribution, they shaped your life. What contribution did they make that you would say, like, wow, this is the most important thing that they planted in my life, that's foundational in my life as to who I am? Now go ahead and type that in the chat line. You know, here's the good news: as fathers today, we have the same privilege. I have a daughter that's 17, a son that's 19. So I'm moving toward our kids going off to school, being out of the home. But at this point, I'm still influencing their lives. I'm still have the privilege of leading in a way that it shapes who they are as a man of God and a woman of God. And that's the same privilege you have. I want to share one verse of scripture with you today. It comes from Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, where Solomon wrote these words. It says, "Train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not turn from it." The Message paraphrase reads like this: "Point your kids in the right direction, and when they're old, they'll not be lost." Now let me be clear to say, and you probably know this, that there's no guarantees in parenting. You know, I wish I could make the guarantee that if you make the investment in that investment, that your kids are going to make all the right choices. Listen, it's possible that you can make the right investments and your children still choose to rebel. They still choose to walk away from God. A proverb is not a promise. I think oftentimes when we read the book of Proverbs, we think they're promises of God. A proverb's not a promise. It's a wise saying that's true most of the time. So what Solomon's saying here is the wise thing for you to do as a father is to train up your child. And most of the time, what's going to happen as a result of your investment, you're going to build a foundation in their lives that keeps them anchored and that keeps them directed. So again, the verse is, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when they're old, they'll not turn from it." When I read that verse, I think of a coach doing training or guiding a young athlete. It doesn't matter what the sport is. There's always those, what I call fundamental skills that you must learn to excel in a sport. And it's the coach that plays the role in training the athlete, helping them learn the fundamental skills. It's the coach that makes the investment that helps the athlete compete well. So it's really, if you think of it like this, it's really back to the basics, and it's all about the basics. I think oftentimes we can get lost in chasing after things, but I think we always have to come back to what are the basics. So as you think about sports, The basics of basketball is dribbling, passing the ball, rebounding, and shooting. That's the basics. You're training a child in basketball, you're going to teach them those basic skills. In baseball, it's throwing, batting, running the bases. It's the basics. In football, it's tackling, blocking, running, and passing the ball. But for the young athlete to become proficient, to be able to compete, what do they need? They need training. And I think that's your role. That's my role as a father. We're a trainer, and we're giving the children fundamental, foundational skills they need to excel. And your investment, hear me, dads, your investment is critical for their future. Your leadership is critical for their future. Recently, I was reading a study by the National Center for Education concerning the value and significance that a father plays in their child's development. I was blown away from the information I was reading in this study, what I discovered. And I want to pull just a few bullets from the study that was done. So dads, listen to this. The presence of a responsible father promotes academic performance and reduces disciplinary problems in school. Your presence, your authority, that what you bring to the home. Here's a second thing made in a statement they made in this study, is that preschoolers with actively involved fathers have stronger verbal skills. A third discovery was children who have experienced high father involvement show increasing curiosity and problem-solving capacity. They also went on to say that highly involved fathers also contribute to increased mental dexterity in children, increased empathy, less stereotyped sex role beliefs, and greater self-control. As I was reading that study, I was reminded again of how critical the role of a father is, not only in the family, but specifically for the children. Listen, Dad, you have a significant contribution to make that's going to determine the direction of the life of your child. So how can you lead? That's the question. How can you lead so your children can follow? I think there's probably numerous ways, but because our time is so short today, I've really narrowed it to 3 points of action that I think are critical. And again, for me, it's always back to the basics. It's what's foundational, what's fundamental. So what's fundamental to you leading so your child can follow? The first thing is this: you need to define your target. Listen, it's most unlikely that you'll hit the target if you don't know what the target is. You know, I'm a sportsman. If I could swing my computer around and show you a picture of my office, I have all kinds of animals hanging in my office. One of my passions is bow hunting. I love to be out in the woods. And before the season starts, every fall, I'm in the backyard shooting my bow, trying to make sure that everything is in line, and then I'm on target. Now, I don't go in the backyard and just fling arrows. That would kind of be silly. I go in the backyard, I set up the target, and I aim for the target. I need to know what I'm shooting at. And I would say it's the same for us as dads. The first thing that's fundamental is, do you know what your target is? Do you know what it is that you want to pass on to your child or your children? Like, if you were going to identify what are the 5 critical values that you want to pass on to your children, do you know what those are? Have you defined those? And then we're going to get to all 5. They're in the chat line. Why don't you type in what you feel is the single most important value that you want to pass on to your children? What is it that you want to establish in their lives? What is that? It's establishing the target. I know for me personally, what I want to pass on to my children is I want to pass on a love for God that directs the decisions of their lives. I want to pass on a value, that they have a value for people, that they honor and respect others. I want to pass on responsibility and that they understand the importance of follow through. I want to pass on a strong work ethic so that someday they're going to be a great employee or maybe a great leader in a company. I want to pass on the value of generosity, that my children understand that they've been blessed so that they can be a blessing. But what's critical is that you've taken time to think through, what's the target? What do I want to build into the lives of my children? Here's the deal, man. If you don't know the target, then you probably won't hit it. So here's my challenge to you. Don't parent randomly, parent on purpose. Say again, don't parent randomly, parent on purpose. Know your target. Here's the second point of action. Be the example. Don't talk the way, show the way. You know, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1, the Apostle Paul said, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. You want to be able to say to your children, follow me, follow my example as I'm following Christ. Listen, leading by example, I believe is like it's the best gift that you can give to your children. The key is to never forget that you are their main role model to follow, at least until adolescence. So basically, they're going to grow up being a whole lot like you. Every once in a while, when I'm kind of like doing something that's a bit off, my wife will call me by my dad's name. It's like, but I picked up that trait, but I'm a whole lot like my dad. So my life was influenced and shaped by him, by his example. You probably heard this phrase before, but more is caught than taught. Was caught and taught. And I think it's so true. Listen, today, I cannot remember too many of the words of wisdom that my dad as the key influencer spoke into my life. I don't remember too many of the talks we had. I'm sure we had some. My dad is a great man of God. But what I do remember is how he lived. What I do remember is how he worshiped God. What I do remember is how he treated others. It was his actions that shaped my life. And I think it's going to be the same for you and your children. And what you do will always have greater value than what you say. And if what you say doesn't line up with what you do, then you're not being the example your child needs. So there has to be consistency. You want to show the way and talk the talk. Recently, I was riding in a car with my teenage son, who, as I mentioned earlier, is 19. And I noticed as we were going down the road how critical he was being of other drivers. They're driving too slow. They didn't use their signal light. Why are they on their brakes? I mean, it was on and on and on. And all of a sudden, I had one of these aha moments, is that's what I had modeled for my son. And that I have this tendency to be critical of other drivers. I always have some place that I want to be, and like, you know, what are they doing? What are they thinking? And so my son was only doing what he had seen me do. So that's the negative example. Let me give you one positive example. My son's training to be an auto mechanic. So the other day he was going to do some work for our neighbor. So he goes over to interact with our neighbor about the work that he's going to be doing on his car. And sometime later, the neighbor came over and said, I got to compliment you on your son. Said he's 19 and he was so interactive. He was respectful. It was yes, sir, no, sir. And I had one of those proud moments as a parent to say, he caught it. I mean, that's like my wife and I treat others with respect. And he had caught that from our lives. So man, it's not that you shouldn't use words, you shouldn't have talk with your children, you should, but always be aware of the power of your example. Your children are going to be a whole lot like you. So lead your children. So to lead your children well, listen, you got to lead yourself well. If you want your children to be passionate followers of Jesus Christ, then listen, then they need to see that in your life. Don't think that's just going to happen. If you want your children to be truthful and individuals of integrity, then they need to see that happening in your life. If you want your children to respect and value others, then again, they need to see that happening in your life. So be the example and model the very traits and characteristics that you would say are valuable. Here's the third point of action, really quick. Invest the time. Keep the family a priority. As in training your child, again, back to Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way they should go. Listen, training a child doesn't happen in a day or at an event. Praise God for Man Up. But an event alone is not going to do it. A week's vacation a year is not going to do it. But listen, you influence your child over a process of time as you are making investments in their lives. Listen, there's been all kinds of conversation about the difference between quality time and quantity time. And I'm not going to get into that conversation, but this is what I would tell you. Your children need both. They need quality time and they need a large quantity of your time. I referenced earlier, I grew up on a farm. So every day I was working with my grandfather and my father. And what that meant is I was blessed with the privilege of spending a whole lot of time because we did life together. And I know not every man, I've not been able to reproduce that for my own son, but that was my growing up experience. We spent a lot of time, I learned a lot of lessons out in the hayfield, working cattle in the strawberry patch, because that's how we grew up. And it was just this great investment time. Now, at that age, I thought it was like abuse of the child labor laws. But today, what I realized is it was a huge gift that I was given because I had this quality and quantity time, and through that there was influence that shaped my life. Now, it wasn't all about work. We had a lot of, we worked hard, but we played hard. I had a lot of trips to the local swim and hoe, a lot of volleyball, a lot of softball, a lot of board games. And what I didn't realize is that my parents were simply working a strategy. And the strategy was that of an investment of time that would shape my life. Now, the challenge for every man, because I live with this challenge every day, the challenge for every man that's a part of this workshop today is you don't have enough time. The demands of life are great on your time. So where are you going to find the time? So we can't create more time. We all have 24 hours in the day. So we're going to find the time. And what I would suggest is that you evaluate how you're spending your time and make some adjustments. If not, this is what's going to happen. Your children are going to get the leftovers. They're going to get the leftovers of your time and the leftovers of your life. So evaluate how are you using your time. And here's 3 quick suggestions as to how you can leverage this precious commodity of time to be able to train and influence your children. The first thing I would suggest is that you manage the media time, both social media and the television. If your children are like mine, and I assume they are, they can spend hours with the phone in front of them with absolutely no interaction with anyone else. Or maybe it's the television that eats up time. I would encourage you, manage the media time so that you have time for interaction with your children. Don't allow technology to rob you of the little time that you have. Here's a second idea. Engage your children in what you're doing. You know, if you're doing yard work, get them out there. Have them do yard work with you. If you're working on the car, have them work on the car with you. Engage them in whatever it is that you're doing. Listen, at times I even create projects just so my children can engage in the project, so we're spending time together. Here's a third idea. Discover what activities your children enjoy and join them in those activities. You know, I mentioned earlier, one of my passions is the outdoors. I love to hunt and fish, but here's the challenge. My son doesn't like to hunt and fish. Broke my heart. I just knew I would have a son who would love what I love. And so I had to make an adjustment, and my adjustment was, even though I don't like video games, we played a lot of interactive video games because I wanted to join him in what he was doing. Not so much because I like video games, but I like spending time with my son. So I found something that he enjoyed, and I joined him in that activity. But the bottom line is this, man, influence requires time. If you're going to train up your child or children, then you must invest the time. Now I realize today that I've probably not told you anything you didn't already know. This is not like new life transforming information, but it's the basics. It's the fundamentals that I believe we need to be reminded of and encouraged to on a consistent basis. Listen, if we're going to lead so our children can follow, we must keep coming back to the basics. And this is what I'll tell you, if you can do the basics well, the outcome is going to be good. You know, work on the fundamentals. Just if you're going to take your son out and teach him how to play baseball, you would work on the fundamentals, the basics. You know, how do you throw the bat? You know, how do you throw the ball? It's the basics that sets them up for future success. And I believe so it is in parenting. So it is when it comes to us as fathers. So I encourage you to do the basics and make the investment so that your children have a firm foundation that they can grow from. So here's the 3 statements again. Define the target, know what you're shooting at. Second, be the example, show the way. And the third is to invest the time. These 3 principles are much easier to talk about than they are to live out. But as you live them, this is what I believe. I believe you're going to set your child up for a great future. What do you want? Listen, every dad, again, we want the same thing. We want a great future for our children. We want to see them loving God, following God. We want to see them successful in whatever their career path would be. So, man, I encourage you today, lead in such a way that your children can follow. Lead in such a way that they can look at your life and say, oh, that's what it looks like to be a man of God. That's what it looks like to live your life in an effective, productive way. So, man, there's a great challenge before us. I know as a dad, I embrace the challenge every day. I know you're embracing the challenge. And I just pray that God gives you great success and that you would be effective as you embrace what I think is your God-given responsibility. Thanks for being a part of the workshop today. Matt, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Farrell, Lemings, thank you so much. Goodness gracious, that was drinking from the fire hose, equipping us and being better fathers. Establish the target, be the example, and invest the time. Throughout your message to us, I kept thinking about Jonathan Stewart and Mike Tolbert and how many times they went to practice being great running backs. And they had a goal in mind. If you're going to be a great football player, you got to have a plan, a target, and you're talking the same language about the topic of fatherhood. Farrell, gosh, thank you so much. We do have some questions. I'm going to get to those. Danny writes, how do we keep outside influences, such as the internet, other people's beliefs, away from our children?
I would say, first of all, there's tools that you can use as it relates to technology. You know, that's one of the big challenges today is everything is so accessible to our children, and they can find themselves being engaged in wrong conversations, and beyond that, getting information that's detrimental for them. So I would encourage, first of all, as it relates to technology, men, discover what tools are out there that can protect your children from that. And then secondly, especially as your kids move into their teenage years, the influence of peers becomes really critical. And so we've stayed very engaged as it relates to not only what our children are doing, but who their friends are. And we help guide that. We try to make sure that their kids are coming here so that we know who they are. We know about the conversations. So again, I think you just have to stay engaged and you have to stay involved and be active to see those influences and direct that. Great question. Thanks, Danny.
Okay. Farrell, one more. Someone writes or asks, do you think we should share ideas on what we didn't do the right way or do the right thing with our children?
I would say that's a loaded question. So I would want to know what that was. But I think I've always believed that I learned just as many lessons from my mess ups and my screw ups as I do my successes. So one of the things that I've tried to do with my kids is I share the successes with them, but I also share with them some of the tough life lessons I've learned that's come about by my own poor choosing. So my hope is I can coach them in such a way that they don't have to experience the pain of some of the things I've experienced. So again, I think we have to be aware. You know, they probably don't need to hear every story, but I leverage that quite often just to talk with my kids to say, hey, I went down this path and it didn't turn out well, and it won't turn out well for you either.
Very good. Yeah. I appreciated the times when my dad was real with me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I have learned of late that discipline was really meant to keep bad things from happening. It wasn't a power play by my dad.
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously discipline should come out of love and concern. We want it to be constructive, not destructive. But I think discipline is a part of the process. It's a part of the training process.
Very good. Well, Farrell Lemings with Grace Covenant Church in Cornelius Davidson, thank you so much for your wisdom that you shared with us today. Very, very insightful. I feel more equipped personally as a dad of 4. So thank you. Fellas, hold on for a minute, and by God's grace, you can listen to a final charge from Bryce today. And remember, any questions, issues, concerns, you want to be involved, reach out to manupcharlotte.org or respond in the sessions on your website. Thank you again. God bless you and have a super day.
Amen. Thanks, Matt.